In today's class of plant biotechnology applications, we would be studying several things related to how plant biotechnology, what is a comparative account of when you take plant biotechnology, how does it differ from plant breeding. Then again we will also be learning about transgenic crops, what exactly are transgenic crops, how transgenic crops are important for food production. We would be again seeking out with relation to what are the advantages of transgenic crops and what are the limitations or the disadvantages of transgenic crops. And with relation to biotechnology and food production, you will also be learning about what is the meaning of the term biofortification or enrichment of plants by means of vitamins, which is termed as biofortification. And parallelly, in this entire session on biotechnology and applications, we will be learning with relation to biotechnology in relation to food production, and we will exactly know how we develop a sort of a bioinsecticide. Next, we will also be learning about how do you breed plants for pest resistance against nematodes, and we will be looking into several other sort of factors related to applications related to plants, agriculture and biotechnology. First, initially coming to plant biotechnology versus plant breeding. Now, you understand when you take plant breeding, we are dealing with the entire crop or the entire plant. That is, in plant breeding, we deal with the relation to the sort of plant. We take in the sort of a flower into consideration, and we have to dust the sort of a pollen and transfer it to the sort of a stigma. So, manually, physically or by means of any other artificial means, we need to dust the sort of pollen onto the sort of a flower. While in the case of plant biotechnology, we do not take the entire plant, we only handle cells and molecules. So, the fundamental difference lies between plant breeding and plant biotechnology is plant biotechnology deals with cells and molecules, whereas plant breeding deals with whole plant systems. And here in the case of plant biotechnology, we do gene transfer. We isolate a gene of interest and we do the sort of gene transfer by either protoplast fusion, which is termed as somatic hybridization. In somatic hybridization, we fuse two protoplasts. We take the cells, remove off the cell walls, and we fuse the sort of protoplast, which is termed as somatic hybridization. Otherwise, we indulge in genetic transformation. Now, genetic transformation is a sort of a technique wherein your recombinant DNA or a foreign gene of interest is put into a sort of a vector or a cloning vector, such as a plasmid, and moved from one bacterial cell to another bacterial cell. Thereby, here we are looking in terms of genetic variation. The goal of biotechnology is to bring about genetic variation, which is very, very precise. While if you take plant breeding, in the case of the plant breeding always aims at improving a sort of a plant variety. We are looking at the whole plant. When you are dealing with relation to plant breeding, we are looking in terms of the plant variety. We take the entire sort of a plant into consideration. Now, the product consumer of biotechnology is a sort of a plant breeder. A plant breeder accepts a genetically modified crop and tries to get multiple copies of the sort of a gene of interest in his sort of a crops. So, thereby biotechnology is linked to plant breeding. Biotechnology and plant breeding is a very, very important sort of a concept if you want to improve food quality. While when you are dealing with relation to plant breeding, we are only talking in terms of the sort of a farmer. So, here biotechnology, when you say it includes a plant breeder, it means it is more scientific. It is more scientific. And it requires, as implied, because we use PCR, we use cloning vectors, we use a competent host, and we use specific sort of a restriction enzymes, etc. It is highly sophisticated. When you take plant biotechnology again is highly sophisticated. It is highly or a high-end technology is used over here. And primarily the realized genes, the realized gains and also the sort of genes are being available or being achievable. So, biotechnology is achievable. We have had several sort of success stories as well as limitations in biotechnology. But despite that, when you take transgenic rice, when you take flavor saver tomato, these are two very important sort of achievements which we got, especially if you take transgenic rice. If you take transgenic rice and flavor saver tomato, these have been the success stories with relation to genetic engineering. While if you take plant breeding, it can be done for all crops and varieties, whereas here it is very, very specific, and the product cost, or because of the sophistication, the product cost is very, very high. The cost produced of a biotechnology component is very, very high. However, the consumer acceptance initially had been very low, but with the success of insulin, and several other applications in medicines as well as agriculture, today biotechnology seems to be more accepted. Though plant breeding has conventionally had a very high strong of consumer acceptance, we understand in plant breeding there have been severe sort of limitations. There have been severe limitations in terms of use of pesticides, fungicides and even residual effect on the sort of soils. So, here when we take a biotechnology exclusively is under the domain of private companies, whereas plant breeding comes more under the sort of government companies. So, when we are talking in terms of exclusive rights with relation to private, and again plant biotechnology is only a few decades old, whereas when you take plant breeding it is century old, whereas biotechnology is only a few decades old. Now, we understand our aim, our goal is checking up a manipulation of cells and molecules, doing gene transfer via somatic hybridization or genetic transformation. Otherwise, by genetic variation, we have great achievements with relation to plant biotechnology. Next, I will just be very quickly going through a series of points with relation to what exactly are transgenic crops and what are the advantages of transgenic crops, what are the advantages of genetically modified crops. And we would be looking in terms of what are the sort of applications. The primary applications of transgenic crops, whenever we take transgenic crops, are with relation to the better nutrient quality as well as you understand with relation to pests and as well as disease resistance. So, we would primarily be first studying about what are the beneficial effects of transgenic crops.